What would make a pediatrician with 15 years of experience suddenly question everything they thought they knew about childhood development and human consciousness? In today's story, you'll meet Dr. Sarah Mitchell and discover what happened during one extraordinary case that changed her understanding of medicine forever. This child's story will challenge everything you believe about the boundaries between life, death, and the mysteries of the human mind. But before we begin, subscribe to the channel to help us reach our next milestone. Leave a like and comment below, telling us about your most unexplainable experience. Now settle in and prepare yourself for a story that will stay with you long after this video ends. There are moments in a medical career when everything you've learned in textbooks, everything you've practiced for years, suddenly feels inadequate in the face of something that defies all rational explanation. I have carried such a moment with me for over 2 years now, and only recently have I found the courage to share what happened during those 7 days in pediatric intensive care. My name is Dr. Sarah Mitchell, and I am a board-certified pediatrician with 15 years of experience treating critically ill children at Children's Memorial Hospital in Chicago. Before the events I'm about to describe, I had always approached medicine with unwavering scientific rationality. I believed in evidence-based treatment, measurable outcomes, and the clear boundaries between what was medically possible and what belonged in the realm of fantasy. I was wrong about those boundaries. The case that shattered my understanding began on a cold February morning when 7-year-old Emma Rodriguez was rushed to our emergency department. Emma had been a perfectly healthy child until 3 days earlier when she suddenly collapsed during a school assembly. No warning signs, no previous medical history, just a vibrant second grader who fell unconscious in front of 300 other students and never woke up. The paramedics found Emma in a deep coma with no apparent cause. Her vital signs were stable, but she was completely unresponsive to any stimulation. By the time she arrived at our hospital, Emma had been unconscious for 72 hours, and despite extensive testing, we had no answers for her parents about what had happened to their daughter. Children's Memorial Hospital is a leading pediatric facility with state-of-the-art equipment and some of the most experienced pediatric specialists in the country. Our pediatric intensive care unit handles the most complex cases, and I had seen children recover from conditions that seemed impossible to survive. But Emma's case was different from anything in my experience. The initial workup revealed nothing unusual. Emma's blood work was completely normal. Her brain scans showed no signs of trauma or abnormality, and every test we performed came back within normal limits. Medically speaking, there was no reason for Emma to be unconscious. Yet she remained in a profound coma, breathing on her own, but showing no response to voice, touch, or even painful stimuli. Emma's parents, Maria and Carlos Rodriguez, were devastated. Maria worked as a teacher at Emma's elementary school and had witnessed her daughter's collapse firsthand. She described Emma as an exceptionally bright and social child who loved reading, drawing, and helping other students with their schoolwork. Carlos, a construction supervisor, took emergency leave from his job to stay at the hospital around the clock. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, our chief of pediatric neurology, consulted on Emma's case from the beginning. Dr. Walsh had 30 years of experience with pediatric neurological conditions and had published extensively on childhood coma and consciousness disorders. Even she admitted that Emma's presentation was unlike anything she had encountered in her career. For the first 3 days after Emma's admission, we continued our diagnostic workup while providing supportive care. We performed additional brain imaging, lumbar punctures, and specialized blood tests, looking for rare metabolic conditions or toxins. Every test result was normal. Emma's brain activity on EEG showed patterns consistent with deep sleep, but she could not be awakened by any means. On Emma's 4th day in our unit, something unprecedented occurred. I was reviewing her chart at the nurse's station when Emma's primary nurse, Rebecca Torres, approached me with a concerned expression. Rebecca had been a pediatric ICU nurse for 12 years and was known for her exceptional clinical judgment and calm demeanor under pressure. "Dr. Mitchell, I need to show you something unusual that happened during Emma's morning assessment," Rebecca said. She led me to Emma's bedside, where the child lay motionless as she had for days. Her parents were in the family lounge taking a brief break at Rebecca's encouragement. "What did you observe?" I asked, noting that Emma's monitors showed stable vital signs and normal oxygen levels. Rebecca pulled up the digital record of Emma's vital signs from earlier that morning. At exactly 9:17 a.m., Emma's heart rate had suddenly increased from 85 beats per minute to 120 beats per minute. Her blood pressure had elevated, and her respiratory rate had quickened significantly. These changes lasted for exactly 3 minutes, and then returned to baseline levels. "Did anything happen at that time that might explain the changes?" I asked. Sometimes medical procedures or nursing care could cause temporary elevation in vital signs, even in unconscious patients. "That's what makes this so strange," Rebecca replied. "I was performing routine morning care, just checking her IV site and adjusting her position. Nothing that should have caused that kind of physiological response. But there's something else." Rebecca showed me additional documentation from the nursing notes. During those same 3 minutes when Emma's vital signs were elevated, her EEG pattern had changed dramatically. Instead of the slow wave patterns typical of deep unconsciousness, Emma's brain activity had shown patterns consistent with active, wakeful consciousness. "Dr. Mitchell, for 3 minutes this morning, Emma's brain was functioning as if she were wide awake and alert, but she showed no external signs of consciousness whatsoever. No eye opening, no movement, no response to stimulation. This finding was medically perplexing. Emma's brain activity suggested she had been fully conscious and aware during those 3 minutes, but her physical examination remained unchanged. She appeared to be in the same deep coma she had been experiencing for days. I immediately contacted Dr. Walsh to review these findings. When she arrived an hour later, we carefully examined Emma and reviewed all the monitoring data from that morning. Dr. Walsh was as puzzled as I was by the disconnect between Emma's brain activity and her physical presentation. "Sarah, in 30 years of practice, I've never seen brainwave patterns like this in a comatose patient," Dr. Walsh told me. "These EEG readings suggest Emma was not only conscious, but hyper-alert during that 3-minute period. Yet she showed absolutely no behavioral evidence of awareness. Could this represent some form of seizure activity?" I asked, though the EEG patterns didn't match any seizure disorders I was familiar with. "No, this doesn't look like any seizure I've seen. This looks like the brain activity of someone who is intensely focused and aware of their surroundings. But that's impossible, given Emma's clinical presentation." We decided to increase the frequency of Emma's EEG monitoring and instructed the nursing staff to document any unusual observations, no matter how minor they seemed. If Emma was experiencing periods of hidden consciousness, we needed to understand when and why these episodes were occurring. That evening, I stayed late to review Emma's case with fresh eyes. As I sat in her room around 10:30 p.m., updating my notes while her parents slept in nearby recliners, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Emma's fingers, which had been motionless for days, began to move in what appeared to be deliberate patterns. At first, I thought I might be seeing involuntary muscle contractions, which can occur in unconscious patients. But as I watched more carefully, Emma's finger movements seemed purposeful and coordinated. Her right index finger was tracing letters against the bedsheet over and over again. I moved closer to observe her hand movements more carefully. Emma was repeatedly tracing the same 3 letters, H-E-L-P. She traced these letters continuously for nearly 10 minutes, while remaining completely unresponsive to voice, touch, or any other stimulation. I immediately checked Emma's monitors. Her vital signs showed the same elevation pattern we had observed that morning, and her EEG indicated full conscious brain activity. Yet apart from the finger movements, Emma showed no other signs of awareness. The implications of what I was witnessing sent chills through me. If Emma was conscious and trying to communicate, what was preventing her from opening her eyes or speaking? What was trapping her in this state between consciousness and unconsciousness? I documented Emma's finger movements and immediately called Dr. Walsh, despite the late hour. She arrived within 20 minutes, and together we observed Emma trace the same letters repeatedly, while her brain activity showed patterns of intense consciousness. Dr. Walsh, this suggests Emma is not only aware but actively trying to communicate with us, I said, as we watched the deliberate finger movements continue. But why only finger movements? Dr. Walsh asked. If she's conscious enough to spell words, why can't she open her eyes or respond to verbal commands? We spent the next hour testing different approaches to communicate with Emma. We asked her to move specific fingers if she could hear us, to trace different letters, to respond in any way possible. But Emma continued tracing the same 3 letters, H-E-L-P. When her parents woke up and saw what was happening, Maria began crying. Carlos, is she trying to tell us something? Is our daughter trapped inside her own body? I had no answers for them. Emma's condition didn't match any medical syndrome I knew of. She appeared to be experiencing what could only be described as selective consciousness, aware enough to attempt communication, but unable to fully emerge from her comatose state. The following morning brought even more disturbing developments. Rebecca reported that Emma had experienced 3 separate episodes of elevated vital signs and conscious brain activity during the night. Each episode lasted exactly 3 minutes, and during each one, Emma had traced letters with her fingers. But the letters were different each time, Rebecca explained, showing me her detailed documentation. The first episode at 2:15 a.m., she traced S-C-A-R-E-D. The second at 4:30 a.m. was C-A-N-T. The third at 6:45 a.m. spelled out L-E-A-V-E. I stared at Rebecca's notes, trying to process what Emma might be trying to communicate. Help. Scared. Can't. Leave. These weren't random letters or meaningless movements. Emma was forming coherent words that suggested she was not only conscious, but experiencing distress. Dr. Walsh and I called an emergency consultation with Dr. Michael Chen, our hospital's leading expert in consciousness disorders and pediatric psychiatry. When we presented Emma's case, including the documented episodes of conscious brain activity and purposeful finger movements, Dr. Chen listened with growing concern. What you're describing sounds like a form of locked-in syndrome, Dr. Chen said, but locked-in syndrome typically results from specific brainstem damage, and Emma's imaging shows no structural abnormalities. Could this be psychological? I asked. Some form of dissociative disorder triggered by trauma? Possible, but the EEG patterns you're showing me indicate genuine neurological consciousness, not psychological withdrawal. Emma's brain is functioning normally during these episodes. Something is preventing her normal consciousness from manifesting physically. We decided to try a new approach. If Emma was indeed conscious during these episodes, We would attempt to establish more sophisticated communication. Dr. Chen suggested using a letter board where Emma could indicate letters by moving her eyes or fingers in response to visual cues. That afternoon, during Emma's next episode of conscious brain activity, we positioned a large alphabet board where she could see it. I spoke directly to Emma, explaining what we were trying to do and asking her to help us understand what was happening to her. "Emma, if you can hear me, we want to help you communicate more clearly. Can you look at the first letter of what you want to tell us?" Emma's eyes remained closed, but her right hand moved to point toward the letter board. Slowly and deliberately, she pointed to letters, spelling out a message that would haunt me for months. Notalone. Not alone. Emma was telling us she wasn't alone. But what did that mean? Who or what did she perceive to be with her in her unconscious state? Maria gasped when she saw Emma's message. "What does she mean? Not alone? Is there someone else there with her?" I had no medical explanation for Emma's communication or what she might be experiencing during her periods of hidden consciousness. But Emma continued spelling out messages that became increasingly disturbing. WONTLETMEGO, SOMETHINGHERE, AFRAIDTOWAKE. Each message suggested that Emma perceived some kind of presence or entity that was preventing her from fully regaining consciousness. She described being afraid to wake up, being held by something she couldn't identify, and feeling unable to leave whatever state she was trapped in. Dr. Chen suggested we consider the possibility that Emma was experiencing some form of hallucinatory consciousness, where her brain was creating vivid experiences that felt completely real to her. But the consistency of her messages and the specific nature of her fear suggested something more complex than simple hallucinations. On Emma's 6th day in our unit, her condition took an even more alarming turn. During her morning episode of conscious activity, Emma spelled out a message that made every staff member involved in her care profoundly uncomfortable. KNOWSABOUTDOCTOR, knows about doctor. Emma was claiming that whatever presence she perceived in her unconscious state knew something about me specifically. This message crossed a line from medical mystery into something that felt almost supernatural. What could she possibly know about me that would be relevant to her condition? I had never treated Emma before her admission, had no previous contact with her family, and couldn't think of any connection that would explain her message. But Emma wasn't finished. Over the next hour, she spelled out additional messages that left me questioning everything I thought I understood about the boundaries between medical science and the inexplicable SAWYOUBEFORE. REMEMBERSYOU Emma was claiming that whatever she was experiencing in her unconscious state had seen me before, remembered me, and wanted to communicate something specific about me. The implications were terrifying because they suggested Emma was accessing information she couldn't possibly have through normal means. As I sat in Emma's room that evening, trying to process the impossible messages she had been spelling out, I found myself questioning whether I was losing my grip on reality. How could an unconscious 7-year-old claim to know things about me that she couldn't possibly know? Yet the evidence was documented, witnessed by multiple medical professionals, and recorded on our monitoring equipment. Dr. Chen suggested we try a different approach. If Emma was indeed accessing information through some unknown mechanism during her conscious episodes, perhaps we could use this to better understand her condition. He proposed asking Emma direct questions about her experience and documenting her responses systematically. The next morning, during Emma's 9:17 a.m. episode, I positioned myself beside her bed with the letterboard ready. "Emma, if you can hear me, we need to understand what's happening to you. Can you tell us where you think you are right now?" Emma's finger moved slowly across the letters, BETWEEN. "Between what?" I asked, though part of me dreaded the answer. HEREANDTGRE. Dr. Walsh, who was observing, leaned forward. "Emma, what do you see in this between place?" Emma's responses became increasingly detailed and disturbing. She described existing in a space that wasn't quite the hospital room, but wasn't somewhere else either. In this in-between realm, she claimed to encounter what she called the Watchers, entities that observed everything happening in our world, but remained invisible to those who were fully alive. According to Emma's fingerspelled communications, these Watchers had been following certain people for years, collecting information about their lives, their decisions, their mistakes. They particularly focused on those who worked with death and dying, those whose jobs brought them close to the boundary between life and death. WATCHERSKNOWABOUTPATIENTS, Emma spelled out. KNOWWHODIDNTMAKEIT. A chill ran down my spine as I realized what Emma might be referring to. In 15 years of pediatric practice, I had lost patients. Not many, but every pediatrician faces cases where, despite our best efforts, children don't survive their illnesses or injuries. These losses stay with us forever, shaping how we approach medicine and how we carry the weight of responsibility for young lives. "Emma, what do the Watchers know about patients who didn't make it?" I asked, my voice barely steady. THEYREMEMBERALLOFT. Remember all of them. Emma was suggesting that these entities she encountered in her unconscious state somehow retained knowledge of every patient who had died, particularly those under my care. The implications were staggering and deeply unsettling. Rebecca, who had been documenting Emma's responses, looked pale. "Dr. Mitchell, should we continue this line of questioning?" Before I could answer, Emma's finger began moving again, spelling out names that made my hands shake. She spelled out the full names of 3 children I had lost during my career. A 4-year-old with leukemia who died 6 years ago. A newborn with 8 years ago. A 10-year-old accident, multiple congenital anomalies from victim from my residency 12 years earlier. These weren't cases that had been publicized or discussed outside of medical settings. Emma's family had no connection to any of these previous patients. There was no possible way Emma could have known these names or their connection to me. "Emma, how do you know these names?" Dr. Walsh asked, though her voice revealed she was as shaken as I was. WATCHERSSHOWEDME, THEYWANTMETOTELLYOU. "Tell me what?" I managed to ask. THEYRENOTGONE, STILLWAITING. Still waiting. Emma was claiming that the children I had lost were somehow still present, waiting for something. The rational part of my mind rejected this completely, but the evidence of Emma's impossible knowledge was undeniable. Dr. Chen, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. "Emma, what are they waiting for? FORYOUTOREMEMBERWHATYOUPROMISED. What I promised." I felt the room spinning as Emma's words triggered a memory I had buried deep in my subconscious. During my residency, when I lost that 10-year-old accident victim, I had made a promise. Standing in the empty hospital room after his family had said their final goodbyes, I had whispered that I would never forget him, that I would carry his memory and honor it by saving other children. But over the years, as my career progressed and new cases demanded my attention, that specific promise had faded from my daily consciousness. I remembered the child's medical case, but I had stopped actively honoring his memory the way I had promised I would. Emma continued spelling THEYALLHAVEMESSIGES. What messages? Dr. Walsh asked. THANKYOUFORTRYING, NOTYOURFAULT, PLEASEDONTFORGETUS. The words hit me like physical blows. For years, I had carried guilt about the patients I couldn't save, wondering if I had made different decisions, worked harder, been more skilled, whether they might have survived. Emma was conveying messages of forgiveness and gratitude that I had never allowed myself to believe I deserved. Tears streamed down my face as Emma continued, FIRSTBOYSAYSYOUDID EVERYTHINGRIGHT LITTLEGIRLSAYSSHEI SNTHURTINGANYMORE BABYSAYSHEKNOWSYOULOVEDHIM. Each message addressed specific guilt I had carried about these cases. The boy who died, despite aggressive treatment, the girl who suffered before her death, the baby who never had a chance to experience love. Emma was conveying exactly the reassurances I needed to hear, but had never believed I deserved. Maria Rodriguez, who had been listening to this exchange with growing amazement, finally spoke. Doctor, is my daughter really talking to children who died? I honestly didn't know how to answer. Everything about Emma's communications defied medical explanation, yet the accuracy and specificity of her knowledge made it impossible to dismiss as coincidence or hallucination. Emma's finger began moving again. THEYANTMETOCOMEBCKNOWSAIDWHATTYNEEDTOSAY. Dr. Chen leaned forward. Emma, do you want to come back? Do you want to wake up? YISBUTSCARED. Scared of what? WHATIFIFORGETTHEMAGAIN. What if I forget them again? Emma was expressing fear that returning to full consciousness would cause her to lose the connection she had formed with these departed children. She had become a conduit for their messages, and she was afraid that waking up would silence their voices forever. I found my voice and spoke directly to Emma. Emma, you won't forget them. I promise you that we'll help you remember everything that happened here. The messages you've shared are too important to forget. Emma's vital signs began to change, her heart rate increasing, and her EEG showing even more intense conscious activity than we had seen before. Her finger movements became more rapid and urgent. THEYSAYITSTIME, THEYSAYTHANKYOU, THEYSAYGOODBYE. Then something unprecedented happened. Emma's eyes opened for the first time in 7 days. She looked directly at me with clear, alert awareness and spoke her first words since her collapse. They wanted you to know they're okay, Dr. Mitchell. They wanted you to stop carrying their sadness. Emma had returned to full consciousness, but she retained complete memory of her experiences in the between place. Over the following hours, as we conducted neurological assessments and confirmed that she had suffered no lasting effects from her week-long unconsciousness, Emma described her experiences with remarkable consistency and detail. She explained that the Watchers had chosen her to deliver messages because children could move between worlds more easily than adults. She had been selected specifically to reach me because the departed children had been trying to communicate their forgiveness for years. But the weight of my guilt had made it impossible for their messages to get through under normal circumstances. Emma's parents were overwhelmed with gratitude for her recovery, but they also struggled to understand the supernatural aspects of her experience. Maria asked me privately whether I believed Emma had truly communicated with deceased children. I told her honestly that I didn't know what to believe anymore. Emma's knowledge of information she couldn't possibly have accessed suggested that something extraordinary had occurred, something that challenged the boundaries between life and death that I had always accepted as absolute. Dr. Walsh, Dr. Chen, and I spent hours analyzing Emma's case, trying to find medical explanations for her experiences. We consulted with colleagues at other hospitals, reviewed literature on consciousness disorders, and explored every possible conventional explanation. None of them adequately accounted for Emma's specific knowledge of my deceased patients or the therapeutic nature of the messages she conveyed. In the days following Emma's awakening, I found myself fundamentally changed as both a physician and a human being. The messages she had delivered from my former patients had lifted a burden of guilt I had carried for over a decade, but they had also opened questions about the nature of consciousness and death that I wasn't prepared to confront. Emma underwent extensive neurological testing to ensure her brain function had returned completely to normal. Every scan, every cognitive assessment, every memory test showed that she was a perfectly healthy 7-year-old with no lasting effects from her mysterious coma. Her recovery was medically complete, but the implications of what had happened during those 7 days continued to haunt our entire medical team. 3 days after Emma's awakening, I received an unexpected visit from Dr. Patricia Henley, the chief of pediatric oncology who had been involved in the care of the 4-year-old leukemia patient Emma had mentioned. Dr. Henley had heard about Emma's case through hospital communications and wanted to discuss something that had been troubling her for months. "Sarah, I need to tell you about something strange that happened in my department last week," Dr. Henley said as we sat in my office. "One of my current patients, a 6-year-old boy with acute lymphoblastic leukemia, told me he had been talking to another child during his treatment sessions. He described this other child in perfect detail, down to the specific medical equipment that would have been used 6 years ago." I felt a chill as Dr. Henley continued. "The child he described matches exactly the little girl who died under your care 6 years ago. He knew her name, knew details about her treatment, knew things that no current patient could possibly know about a child who died before he was even diagnosed. Had this boy ever met Emma Rodriguez or heard about her case?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "No contact whatsoever. He's been isolated in our oncology ward for weeks due to his compromised immune system. But Sarah, he asked me to tell you something specific. He said the little girl wanted you to know that she's helping other sick children now, that she's not scared anymore." Dr. Henley's report suggested that Emma's experience might not have been an isolated incident. Perhaps there were other children who had glimpsed this between place she described, other young patients who had encountered the watchers and the departed souls who seemed to linger in the spaces between life and death. I began to pay closer attention to my young patients, listening more carefully to things they said that I might have previously dismissed as fever dreams or medication-induced hallucinations. What I discovered over the following weeks challenged everything I thought I knew about childhood consciousness and the dying process. A 5-year-old girl recovering from heart surgery mentioned seeing a boy in her room who wore different clothes and seemed sad. Her description matched a patient I had lost 3 years earlier, down to the specific cardiac monitor leads he had required. An 8-year-old with severe pneumonia described conversations with children who looked sick but seemed happy. Children who told him stories about doctors and nurses who had tried to help them. Most disturbing was a 9-year-old girl named Sophie Chen, who had been admitted with complications from diabetes. During her second night in our unit, Sophie experienced a brief period of altered consciousness, similar to what Emma had undergone. For 20 minutes, Sophie's brain activity showed patterns of intense awareness, while she appeared unconscious to external observation. When Sophie regained normal consciousness, she asked to speak with me privately. "Dr. Mitchell, there are children here who aren't in beds," she said, with the matter-of-fact tone that only children can use when discussing the impossible. "They told me they know you. They said you carry too much sadness about them." "Sophie, what did these children look like?" I asked, though part of me dreaded the answer. They looked sick, like they had been in the hospital for a long time. But they seemed peaceful. They said they wanted to thank you for fighting so hard for them, even when it didn't work. The pattern was becoming undeniable. Multiple children in our unit were reporting encounters with deceased patients, specifically children who had died under my care or the care of my colleagues. These weren't random hallucinations or generic visions. They were specific, detailed communications that addressed the professional guilt and grief that every pediatrician carries. I began documenting these reports systematically, creating a confidential file of unexplained patient communications. Within 6 weeks of Emma's case, I had recorded similar experiences from 12 different children across various medical conditions. Each child described encounters with specific deceased patients, and each conveyed messages of forgiveness, gratitude, or comfort directed toward their medical caregivers. Dr. Chen became fascinated by these reports and began researching similar phenomena in medical literature. What he found was limited but compelling. Scattered case reports from pediatric hospitals around the world described children who claimed to communicate with deceased patients during periods of altered consciousness. Most of these reports had been dismissed as hallucinations or psychological responses to medical stress. But when Dr. Chen analyzed the patterns, he found remarkable consistency. Children experiencing these communications often provided accurate information about deceased patients they had never met. The messages they conveyed typically addressed specific emotional needs of healthcare providers, and the experiences seemed to occur most frequently in children who were themselves critically ill or undergoing significant medical procedures. "Sarah, I think we're witnessing something that medical science hasn't recognized yet," Dr. Chen told me during one of our research meetings. "These children may be accessing some form of consciousness that exists independently of normal brain function. It's as if severe illness or medical crisis opens a doorway to experiences that healthy individuals can't access." "But why children specifically?" I asked. "Why don't adults report these same experiences?" Children's brains are still developing. Their sense of boundaries between reality and imagination is more fluid. They may be naturally more receptive to forms of consciousness that adults have learned to filter out or dismiss. The hospital administration became aware of our research when several families began asking about their children's reports of communicating with deceased patients. Some parents were distressed by these accounts, worried that their children were having psychological breakdowns. Others found comfort in the messages their children conveyed, especially when those messages addressed their own grief about other children they had known. Dr. Margaret Foster, our hospital's chief medical officer, called me into her office 6 weeks after Emma's case to discuss the growing number of reports from our pediatric unit. "Sarah, I'm hearing concerning reports about children in your unit claiming to communicate with dead patients. The hospital's risk management department is worried about potential liability issues if families believe we're somehow encouraging supernatural experiences." "Dr. Foster, I understand the concerns, but we're documenting medically unexplained phenomena that may have significant implications for our understanding of consciousness and the dying process. These children are providing information they couldn't possibly have through normal means. 2 years have passed since Emma Rodriguez opened my eyes to mysteries that medical textbooks never prepared me for. I still practice pediatric medicine, but I approach each case with profound humility about the boundaries of human consciousness and the spaces between life and death that children seem uniquely able to access. Emma remains healthy and vibrant, though she occasionally mentions dreams about the children she met in that between place. Her messages of forgiveness changed not just my career, but my understanding of what it truly means to heal. Sometimes the most haunting cases become the most transformative, teaching us that medicine involves more than just treating bodies. It requires acknowledging the deeper mysteries of human existence that science has yet to explain.